South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed the contentious Expropriation Bill into law. That allows the government to acquire land without paying any compensation. The new law repeals the apartheid-era Expropriation Act of 1975 and sets out how organs of the state may acquire land in public interest for varied reasons.
We should no longer be afraid of this process of having to change the land ownership architecture in our country. It is here and it is here to stay. It is going to happen.
South Africa's government confirmed that it could expropriate land, buildings, and other assets under the Expropriation Act. Even houses and businesses are not entirely safe. In January 2025, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the controversial expropriation bill into law, which sets out how state organs can expropriate land in the public interest. The government claimed that the new bill aligns legislation on expropriation with Section 25 of the Constitution. This section recognizes expropriation as an essential mechanism for the state to acquire someone's property for a public purpose or in the public interest. The nil compensation clause received special attention. It mentions instances where nil compensation may be just and equitable for expropriation in the public interest. It may be just and equitable for nil compensation to be paid where land is expropriated in the public interest, the bill states. The Act lists examples of nil compensation, including where the land is not being used. However, it states that it is not limited to the circumstances provided in the Act. Simply put, the government can take property without paying for it if it makes a case that it is in the public interest. The government confirmed that expropriation does not only apply to land. The Act applies to land, buildings, and other assets for legitimate public use, it said. It added that under the proposed expropriation bill, these assets may be expropriated in the public interest or for a public purpose. The Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, or any government body authorized by the department, has the sole right to expropriate, it said. Ramaphosa has also previously confirmed that the Expropriation Act allows state organs to take all types of properties. He said the government can use South Africa's new Expropriation Act to take abandoned buildings in cities' central business districts without paying. These abandoned buildings, where the owners have run away, should be subjected to the law we have just passed, expropriation, even without compensation, he said. Although homes and businesses are protected, they are still at risk if they meet specific criteria for public use. Deputy President Paul Mashatile added that the Expropriation Act will help the government fast-track land reform and settle outstanding land claims. This raised serious concerns about a repeat of Zimbabwe farm invasions, which devastated the country's economy and financial system.
There's no reason for people to be afraid, to fear that there's going to be whole-scale expropriation of land. And in fact, we have said to those who are investing in our country that they should have no fear that their land and property is going to be expropriated.
Many stakeholders, including political parties and community groups, strongly opposed the new Expropriation Act. The Democratic Alliance declared a dispute within the Government of National Unity after Ramaphosa signed the act into law. President Trump said he would cut off all future funding to South Africa until a full investigation into taking land from certain people has been completed. The government hit back, saying South Africa has constitutionally embedded values of respect for the rule of law, justice, fairness, and equality. It said expropriation is a legal process that will be handled fairly and with respect for people's rights. It's always essential that the process is transparent and that all affected parties are treated justly, the government said. It added that the state's power is exercised with strict oversight and in accordance with the law, ensuring that expropriation is only used in the public interest. The goal should always be to ensure that expropriation serves the greater good, benefits society as a whole. The goal is to create a fairer and more inclusive economy, but it's important to ensure that all concerns are heard and addressed constructively. The Expropriation Act sets out a clear legal framework under which expropriation may take place, always with due process and court oversight, McPherson said. I'm committed to ensuring that this act is constitutional and that there will be no arbitrary land grabs by the state in South Africa.
South Africa is fighting back, not just the ANC government, the party of Nelson Mandela, but also the Afrikaners minority as well. And there's two different stories layered over one another. And to understand this, you've sort of got to follow the back and forth between South African government and the US government, because this has been the accelerant to kick all of this off. So the thing that started it all really is Cyril Ramaphosa signed an expropriation bill into law, and what this did was it allowed the government to expropriate land or take people's land and not pay them for it. Compensation part of it was optional. So in theory you could be a farmer and the government can say, I want your land, and they don't give you anything for it, even though you owned it. And of course, this is obviously an erosion of private property rights. They don't really exist in South Africa because the government can just take things from you. And
we got that under the Labour government who want to take farms away at not even market price. So this is a halfway house to that.
It is indeed. And this was obviously to target the white minority in South Africa because, of course, the ANC has made it its business to whip up anger at this minority and blame their failings to keep the infrastructure they had functional, and so they're distracting people from their inability to govern by saying, well, look at all of these white farmers, they own all the land, therefore they're greedy, they're taking things from you, when in reality they're incompetent and quite often very corrupt. Everyone knows that corruption in South Africa is rife, and a lot of the time these things are not being done because there's someone being paid. And also, that it's worth mentioning, these land expropriations, quite often when they're actually there marking up the farms to take them, there are politicians on the ground saying, oh well, I'll have this bit, and so they're directly benefiting from it. They know that they're the ones that get to choose which farms get taken, and they can take some for themselves. And they said, don't be alarmed, the court may award you nil compensation, but it's not required to, so it's okay. And of course this is not reassuring whatsoever, because you're still at the mercy of the courts as to whether your livelihood is ruined.
Political scientist Dr. Franz Kronya warned that the biggest threat of the Expropriation Act is the government taking any property and paying less than its market value. He said that when the state can seize any fixed or movable property for less than its market value, it gravely weakens property rights. The previous act compensated owners whose property was expropriated based on market value and for financial loss. With the previous act, property rights were secure because market values are an objective measure to judge compensation, Kronya said. However, the new Expropriation Act dilutes market value considerably. It adds other subjective factors, like national interest. Something like national interest can mean anything in the calculation on how much someone must be compensated for their property, he said. Under the new Expropriation Act, it is impossible to say how much a person will be paid if their property is expropriated. It is maddening that the discussion around the Expropriation Act is centered around land and nil compensation, he said. The core problem and heart of the Expropriation Act is hardly understood across South Africa's economy. Kronya said the Expropriation Act would, in practice, prevent South Africa from attracting the new investment it needs to raise the ratio of fixed capital formation to GDP. This will prevent South Africa from increasing the rate of job creation to a point where the country can significantly reduce unemployment. Kronya said when the President of the United States warns a country that their stance on property rights and will make them unsuccessful, they should hear him out.
As a farmer, our property rights are very important because we use our farms as collateral to access funds from banks, to plant and to do all our farming. And this act has brought uncertainty in the sense that we're not really sure which property will be targeted for expropriation.
And earlier this week, there were reports that the land seizing from white farmers had begun. 2 farms in the northern province of Limpopo were targeted. Farmers were offered less than 10% of the land's market value, and talks with the owners to buy the properties collapsed. Now, the plan is not only sparking controversy among South Africans. Shortly after Fox News aired a segment on the issue, President Trump weighed in. He tweeted, "I've asked Secretary of State Pompeo to closely study the South Africa land and farm seizures and expropriations and the large-scale killing of farmers."
We remain unshaken. Actually, we are more determined after the Donald Trump tweet to expropriate our land without compensation. There is no white genocide here. It's an absolute rubbish to say there is white genocide. There is black genocide in the USA. They are killing black people.